In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. Yeah, let's get right into it. We're talking about a compare and contrast of the handling of top secret or classified documents between Biden and Trump, and really looking at not so much about how the two of them did things differently, but more interested in how the media and the DOJ, our Department of Justice, are handling things differently. Is that how you have been looking at this?
Yep.
Okay. Any place in particular you want to begin?
I guess, I see you said you don't want to deal too much with how they're handling it differently, but I think that you'll make the argument that that is partially why um, other people are handling it differently. And I kind of see that argument. Trump was a little bit more rebellious or recalcitrant. Didn't want to give the paperwork back. Some of the articles that I sent you, they're saying now, well, it's just weird. It seems like he almost did it just because he thought it was his property, not because it was anything nefarious. But a lot of what, you know, the motivation for making sure that they got that information, a lot of the news stories were talks about espionage and nuclear secrets and things like that when it was Trump, but it hasn't been anything similar with Biden. I think that's one of the major differences that I saw was that, in the Washington Post article, I think I shared with you, they were talking about the, that the fact that it was the Espionage Act that's why they were going after. One of the three reasons that it wasn't just about classified documents, it was the Espionage Act that criminalizes the unauthorized retention or disclosure of information related to national defense that could harm the U.S. Um, and a lot of the discussion that happened online as well, or that happened from news sources, was how dangerous this was, that we needed to get this information back because it could be espionage. However, when it happened with Biden, everybody's like, well, he's cooperating. But they first found out about this on November 2nd, and it's taken three instances of them finding more and more documents. And when Biden was asked about the Trump situation before they found the documents in his possession, he made us a number of comments, and this is one that I shared with you, that about how it was so irresponsible, it was very dangerous, but nobody's coming back and pushing on him in that same way now and talking about, well, this could be espionage or how dangerous this is. They're just saying, well, he's turning stuff over. Yeah, over the course of 3 months, like he doesn't know where this stuff was, and it certainly wasn't um, handled with very much care if he doesn't know where it is, if it takes 3 months for him to figure out where all of it is, assuming there's no more left to be found. And it obviously wasn't kept in secure locations. So I don't see the same handling in that regard of Biden as we saw with Trump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when it's talked about, whether the media is handling things the same or handling things different, it can be somewhat difficult at times to really assign the reasons why. Now, of course, if we believe that there's bias. And we all admit that we are all biased to a degree. It can be easy to assign bias there. One of the reasons one could argue why there was more conversations going on around the Trump situation. One is because it was going on for a whole lot longer. When this news first broke, I think it was in February. It was in January of 2022 when the first batch of material was taken back to the National Archives. That's when classified information was found, and information was still coming out in August of that year. So there's 8 months of this ongoing activity with Trump's situation. And one of the consequences of having a 24-hour news cycle is that people need to fill the airwaves. And so what a lot of times the way they fill it was speculation and guessing and wondering what ifs, and what could there be nuclear codes in the information that he had? Could there be information that's dangerous for other nations, or dangerous for our secret operatives in other countries? And so there's a whole lot of conversation that's going on. As you pointed out, the Biden story has been going on a lot less time. I think the story first broke in early January. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
No?
Even though they found the documents in November.
Well, yeah, you're right. And so, and of course, this is one of the things that people are talking about is why weren't we told? And we can get to that in a moment, but the point is that we have the Biden situation has been a topic of conversation for a few weeks, whereas the Trump conversation was happening for 8 months. And so just in terms of trying to fill the airwaves, there's going to be a difference.
Well, Brian, I almost would see the opposite, because everybody's looking for the next shiny story to come along. The fact that it took so long, but it stayed so prominent in people's minds, is a testament, or in the news cycle, is a testament to how much they deal with this stuff with Trump. I mean, 8 months is a long time for a story to stay prominent in the news. And if you look at the Biden, now if we took your argument and said, well, listen, it's been 8 months. Well, now it's been even longer. But, if we started with Trump, now we can look at Biden and compare and contrast because it's been going on all this time. But if we took your argument and said, well, it's been so long, and they're looking into that. But when Biden comes up, okay, no discussion of espionage, no discussion of, or very little discussion except from Republicans of how this could be a serious security threat. No going back to Biden and said, hey, just a few short months ago, you were telling us how irresponsible this was, how you couldn't understand how Trump could have left these taken these documents out of the White House. Nobody's going back to him and calling him onto the carpet and being like, hey, what the heck? You said this just a short while ago, and now you're doing the same thing. Like, this is crazy. The only one that's really doing that is Peter Doocy at Fox News,
Well, let's address Biden's comments, because I think that is important. You're right that here we have another beautiful example of Biden sticking his foot in his mouth, which he does with great frequency. I think the only person that is more commonly said things that people couldn't comprehend or were just bewildered and baffled by was the president right before him. And I'm not justifying Biden's behavior in any way, because if you're going to accuse someone of bad behavior, you better make sure you're not going to get caught in the same trap, because you just look like a fool now. And that's exactly the way you're right, Biden does look that way. And maybe part of the reason why they're not really railing on him about that is because this is a pretty frequent occurrence. This is another Bidenism of him saying something. And the fact that it took 4 months for something he said to come back and turn out to be a stupid thing to say is actually sort of surprising. Usually it just takes a couple hours or a couple days for something he said for us to discover it was a stupid thing to say. So
yeah, I don't know, Brian. Your argument for why they treat them differently is because Biden says stupid things a lot. I don't know.
I'm not talking about the media in particular. I'm talking about Biden in particular. That Biden.
You and I both are talking about their treatment of Biden, the media's treatment of Biden, and media's treatment of Trump. And if your explanation is, well, he always says stupid things, so they probably weren't too surprised by that.
I'm not justifying the news media's giving Biden the pass on this. All I'm saying is he has a long history, well before he was president, well before he was vice president, of verbal gaffes. This is something that's always happened, and it's talked about frequently. Now, when you're saying that the media is dismissing it, this verbal gaffe, I'm not looking at it from as particularly partisan. I just think that this is another example of politicians saying one thing and getting caught in the same trap, and it does happen a lot. And Is it the media and for showing their bias? Perhaps, but I think that it's if it is, it's one of the minor areas and really not that important. If you want to talk about the media bias, talking about how they handle the DOJ handling of Biden, I think is a little more important, a little more interesting in this story. And if we,
Well, that may be so, but the discussion was about both the media and the DOJ. It was about all those things. And we
yeah,
see them. I mean, you can say, well, maybe it's because they think he's dumb and he doesn't. I know you're not excusing it, but maybe this is why. Okay, but that is proof of them handling him differently, as they often do. And the whole all along, it was, as you know, it's the same type of thing. I think at one point in the when we talked about this a few days ago, when we were trying to decide what our discussion would be, you made a comment about, and it was probably somewhat in jest, about senility, about how he'd left these, maybe one of the reasons was, had something to do with senility. I think in general, they're much more inclined with Trump, and everybody seems to be much more inclined with Trump to say, well, this is nefarious, espionage, possibly, maybe it's nuclear secrets. It happens to Biden, like, oh well, he's a little bit silly, one other example that I would give is the National Archives. They came out with it when Trump was talking about, listen, I'm not the only one that's taken information. Other people have done it as well. They came out with a couple of statements, one of them on October 11th, saying reports that indicate or imply that those presidential records, and they had already mentioned in that announcement Barack Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, all these presidents that left office. And they said, we take ownership of that stuff. They don't take that with them. Reports that indicate or imply that those presidential records were in the possession of the former presidents or their representatives after they left office, or that the records were housed in substandard conditions, are false and misleading. So has anybody gone to have they come out afterwards and said, oh, well, I guess we were wrong because Obama administration documents were now found outside of our control? Has anybody called them out and said, hey, I guess Trump was right? Or, even if they came out and said, well, this looks like it was a mistake, I'm sure it wasn't intentional, which is what they seem to be kind of doing anyway with Biden. Everybody's talking with Biden about, well, this was probably a mistake, he's cooperating, even though it took 3 months. I mean, 3 months is a long time. I know it's not the same amount of time.
explain the
but
3
it's 3
months.
months.
Explain
What's
the 3
that?
months. Explain the 3
Because
months.
they first announced this on October 2nd. And just last week, they came out with the latest document, or I don't know if it was document or documents that they found that were classified, that they found that was in his possession.
October. What happened on October 2nd?
November, was it November 2nd? I'm sorry. I think it was November 2nd.
You're talking about
November 2nd was the first.
Biden's classified documents is what you're.
Yeah, November 2nd. So that's
Okay.
November, December, and then I guess you can say part of January. So
Okay.
2.5 months. But that's a long time. And everyone's like, well, he's cooperating. Well, it's taking him a long time to find this stuff. And the stuff, was in his in a storage unit. It was in his house that Hunter Biden, I believe, was living in. That we don't need to get too much into the stories about the amount of rent that it looked like Biden was paying, Hunter was paying to President Biden. But all this time he had those documents, and it does not look like they were in a secure place. But nobody is concerned about, is anything bad happening? How irresponsible is this? They're like, well, he's cooperating. I mean, he's cooperating, even though all this time those documents were unsecure.
Okay, so the because of all the conversations that were happening around the Trump situation, one of the things that came up was what laws would be is the DOJ concerned with, and there were 3 different laws that the DOJ is concerned with, and one of them, number 793, says that that law, any person who willfully retains national defense material and fails to deliver it to the officer or employee of the United States entitled to receive it, that they can be charged with that particular law. And the reason why that one is important is because whether something is classified or not is irrelevant. All that it matters is that whether it is national defense material. Classification doesn't matter. The other two laws that we're talk that are relevant to
Hold
this.
on, Brian. On that point,
Okay.
that was my whole point. I agree. But that question about whether somebody had broken that law was asked about Trump, not about Biden.
Sure. And the difference, the
Go
difference
ahead.
being, there's the phrase willfully retaining, not accidentally retaining or unintentionally retaining. Willfully
Okay, so
retaining.
there it is. There it is. Like, we know that Trump did it willfully, and he thought he had his reasons to do so.
Yep.
And uh, he says he could declassify it or whatever else. But everybody says, well, even though this was happening since 2016 with Biden, and it's taken 3 months to get it, it wasn't willful.
Right.
The assumption is it was him cooperating. That this what you're saying right now is my point. They're saying, well, with Trump, he's trying to do something nefarious. He's probably trying to keep national defense secrets, and he's doing something wrong. With Biden, like, well, I mean, it was just a mistake. It was an honest mistake.
Well, you can't just, especially we're talking about court of law, and when we're talking about these particular statutes, we have to talk about a court of law. You can't assume. There has to be evidence one way or the other. And so what we have in the
We're not
evidence,
just talking about a court of law.
well, but when we talk about these statutes, we are. If we're
No,
talking specifically about these statutes, we're talking about whether someone could be charged with a crime or not.
but we're not just talking about getting charged with a crime. We're talking about the way that the media handles this.
Sure, yeah, and that's
And
that.
they
That
don't
is
have to. They don't have the same standards. They could be saying like, "Hey, this is dangerous." Nobody's saying that.
of
They're
course.
only saying that about Trump. They could be saying like, "Hey, look how responsible." I mean, he told us a few months ago how irresponsible this is, and now he's doing the same thing. I mean, this is so irresponsible. I don't know if we can get him in court, but man, he shouldn't be doing this. Think of the things that could be happening here.
You're right, and the media doesn't only report on criminal activity or activity that could eventually lead in conviction. I was merely addressing the issue of the statutes to look at specifically whether they could be potentially charged with a crime. That's why I was bringing up the statute, and this is where the other two statutes come into play. Is that the other two statutes make it illegal to conceal or destroy official documents, and that's where that, like, the shorthand word for that is obstruction. Did an individual obstruct the government? And so when we look at the two situations of Biden and Trump, it looks like, and of course both of them would have to go to court to prove one way or the other. It looks like Trump was willfully retaining material, and it looks like he was obstructing the government and getting that material back to the government. On the other hand, it looks like on the surface that Biden was not willfully retaining it, that it was in his possession accidentally. And it looks like he was not obstructing, but actually, as soon as people became aware that he had it, that they very quickly went and contacted the people that it should be given to. And that's why, from the Department of Justice perspective, the two are different.
You could be right. I think there's a lot of assumptions there that you obviously have to make. And you said very quickly, 2.5 months isn't very quickly to me, but
Well, no, that's when it was reported. That's not when it happened. The initial November 2nd was when the documents they were found, and then the DOJ was immediately called, and the DOJ was then in those conversations between Biden's lawyers and.
But the whole point, Brian, is they then found other documents 2 other times, one of them about a week ago. So to say
Sure.
that they could very quickly, you're acting as if, oh yeah, right away he was doing everything he was supposed to. Yeah, but we have to, in order to believe that, we have to assume that he was a bumbler, that he didn't realize he had classified documents in his possession, and it took him 2.5 months to find the last documents.
Yep.
So that's a pretty big assumption. And so you're making a lot of assumptions here and saying, well, I mean, Trump was obviously because the other assumption you have to make about Trump is that there was something in his possession that he was willfully withholding that met the other part of the statute, which was that it was contrary to our national defense, or is going to be harmful to our national defense. If it was just documents that didn't really matter that he presumably had declassified, I don't understand exactly how that works. I know there seems to be a precedent that presidents can do that,
But it's not relevant.
but
Whether they're classified or not is not relevant.
it is relevant if they're not documents that relate to national defense.
There's no statute that specifically addresses whether the classified documents are held or not. The ones that we're looking at are not at all relevant to whether they're classified or not.
Why?
Because as in number 793, all that matters is that they are willfully retained in their national defense material. And the other two.
So that's my point, Brian, is the only way that you're making a point that makes any sense is if they are documents that relate to national defense. If they don't, then he was perfectly then it was within his right to declassify those documents. So yes, it does matter because then he's done nothing wrong.
Even if they were, whether they're classified, they're declassified, they were not sensitive in any way whatsoever, they are not his. If they occurred because he was president, they are not his property. They are the property of the National Archives and the U.S. Citizenry. They are not his, and that was one of the things that people were talking about when.
Where does it say that? Where does it say that?
That was the whole issue when those National Archives went to Mar-a-Lago in January of 2022 to get those 15 boxes of materials that they had. He did not have a legal right to any of those papers because they were papers that they were presidential papers. They were not personal papers. And when the National Archives was going through those papers, then they found classified documents, and then the DOJ got involved. It wasn't that they were. That's why the National Archives was in conversations with Trump about getting that material back.
So what documents? So you're saying he can't take any document from the White House?
Only personal stuff that deal with him, with Donald Trump, the individual. Anything that deals with Donald Trump, the president, he cannot take with him. Those go to the archives, and that's why so many presidents like to have their own little libraries where National Archives will then manage that location, and they can have everything on hand that occurred during that individual's presidency.
Yeah, it could be. And he did turn over those. Yeah, so you're saying he turned over those documents in January. And then administration material believed it contained historical records. That's where they started finding, because he turned that stuff over because they were requesting it. Then they found, because he's turned, even over the course of this, I was surprised how many times he's actually turned the documents over to the NARA.
Right. Now, the reason why they were turned over in January was because the NARA was was in conversations to get those documents in the fall and the winter of the earlier that year. And this is where the timeline becomes important, which I've now put up on the screen, which I think I shared with you earlier, is that the National Archives gets the documents in mid-January, and within those documents, they find some classified documents. They're not allowed to look at them, so they quickly contact the people that can. They ask the DOJ to investigate, and between February 9th, when they asked the DOJ to investigate, and May 10th, which is when the National Archives sends a letter to Trump and to Trump's legal team outlining all the resistance they've been the victim of in trying to get these other documents from them. So there was a course of March, April, May, 3 months when they couldn't get any more information. So yes, Trump kept on giving information back to them, but it was a frequent fight, and there was a lot of resistance to getting that information.
Yeah, even his own lawyers, there was some story, I think there was an anonymous source in Trump's team that he would get mad when they were like, listen, you should turn this stuff over. He's like, no, this is my stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounded so very Trump. But what would be interesting with all of this, Brian, because there has been all this talk of espionage and everything else. We'll just see where it goes, because so often when there's these investigations with Trump, it's like there's smoke, but there's never fire. It kind of reminds me a bit, as I was looking through all of this, it reminds me a bit of the Clintons, when it's like all these stories come up and there's always smoke, but there's never quite fire. I know you'll see it differently. I'm not saying they're the same
Well,
thing at all.
no, actually, I'm not going to contradict you. I'm not going to say something different. But in the course of a lot of this activity around Trump and around the different lawsuits that he's had, someone brought up the point that charging a president is something that nobody wants to do because it always appears political. And you think about it, and it really is true. I mean, how difficult it is to the I think the only way you could get away with it, and even then there's going to be questions, is if you were if you were the spouse, if you were a direct close confidant, if you were the child of the person, then they might say, well, this may not be political. There actually may be a legitimate reason for this person to be charged, and there's no ulterior motive. But otherwise, it's always going to appear political when you go and charge not just a president, but any political operative.
Yeah, I mean that could be the case. I guess with Trump and Biden, when this came up, there should have, it seemed to me that there should have, if especially the media would have spent a little bit more time kind of at least appearing to be like, oh, this really looks bad, but here's why it's different, or kind of almost being apologetic and being like, yeah, it was so, if they really came out and were talking about how irresponsible it was and kind of comparing what Biden said, I don't know, that there should be more of an effort to at least make the appearance of being even-handed, because it seems like when it's Trump, everybody's falling all over themselves to prove how dangerous this could be. When it's Biden, it's like, well, I mean, it probably just was a mistake. I mean, really should have been handled much. He really should have handled a lot better. He really made that's really unfortunate that he made these mistakes. I mean, Justin Amash, a former representative that I really liked. I think he's out of Indiana or something like that. He's a libertarian, like the only libertarian ever to be elected to Congress, I think, or that ran as a libertarian, I guess. But he talked about, he goes, listen, when you get those classified documents, there's no mistaking it. You're very careful. If you're handling that with any level of responsibility, this doesn't just happen. This is really irresponsible that this happened. If they spent some time talking like that with Biden, about Biden, that would have made, I think that would have put a lot of people more at ease with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that someone's past reputation and experience should color the way people cover a story or react to a situation?
I think to some degree, yes, but I think there's a real danger there, because I think that's the problem, that if you're going to be an unbiased reporter, you almost have to take on, in a court of law, you can't say, well, this guy's guilty because he's got a bad record, or because he was convicted of something earlier. You can't use that stuff, to prove your point. In the same way, I think the reporters should look at every story and handle them. I think there's a real danger that reporters are going to appear very, very biased and be very, very biased. Just as an example, I hate to keep bringing this one up, but um, when we looked at when we looked at the Charlottesville bit with Donald Trump, and everybody was so convinced that he was a racist, and they said, well, he did not condemn the white supremacists. And you can see in the transcript that he very, very clearly did. There's no question that he did. You can say something else, but they were just so certain that he was racist that they couldn't see him condemning white supremacists. So even though he was right there saying it in the transcript, people weren't believing it. I don't know. I'm just trying to give an example of, I think there's a real danger there that, yeah, if every time something happens with Trump, you're jumping to the conclusion, you're looking for proof to fit your narrative, I think is the real danger. So there maybe should be, I don't think you can ignore people's past history, but with Trump, if he says something right, we should accept it. If he says something wrong, we should accept it. When you're listening to a news source that you disagree with, if they say something right, agree with it. If they say something wrong, disagree with it. You know what I mean?
Well, first of all, for anyone else that might be listening to this, that at first I was resistant to the idea that Trump actually said there were, and I can't, was it the good people on both sides or whatever it was. Um, and if you go back, and part of the problem with all of it is that Trump speaks in disjointed sentences, But the bigger problem is that the reporter was jumping all over the place from one question to another question, and Trump couldn't get a full coherent sentence out one after the other. And so you can kind of, if you jump along, it does sound like he was saying that there were good people on the side of the white supremacists. But when you go back and look at it, it actually is he's not actually saying that. So just to clarify, yes, he may be a racist. I believe he's a racist, but in that situation, he did not make a racist statement. There's other evidence other times that he has. Now, moving on from that, I think that, if we take a different example, if someone has been caught time and again, cheating on their spouse, and then they come home, were you out cheating? No, I wasn't. Well, I don't believe you, because the other 15 times you were cheating. It's not to say that they're automatically guilty of cheating on their spouse, but there is a predisposition to say they could be cheating again. We're not going to say that, that's outrageous to make the accusation, because there is a long history of that sort of behavior. And so I do feel like if we another comparison between Trump and Biden, both of them have a long history of verbal word salads, as the phrase has now become very popular, of saying all sorts of weird and crazy things. And Trump also has a long history of lawsuits, of being found, or of how should I say, of having to pay fines for misbehaviors, and the companies that are under his control also fall in that category. And so when we see more obstructionist behavior happening with regard to these documents, I don't think it's fair to immediately assume he's out selling state secrets to North Korea. I think that might be jumping too far, and I don't know that anybody ever said that. Although there were talks that may have been one of the motivations. That was something that came up. Could he be holding on to these documents for money-making purposes? And they don't, of course, who knows? But I also don't think, given past behavior, given history, that Trump and Biden in those two situations should be treated the same.
Okay, so you are conceding the point. I am right. The media was biased against Trump and not against Biden, but it was justified that they handle it that way.
No, I wouldn't call it bias at that point. I'd say that you're responding to history. I would say that I think that, and this is one of the challenges when we talk about the media, because there are absolutely very biased media sources. I was reading some of the junk that's coming out of places like the Huffington Post, incredibly biased, horribly biased, absolutely biased. And I bet we could look through and find, a handful of stories from even some of the legitimate sources that were biased as well, jumping to conclusions. But I think if we look at, there's one other thing that I wanted to show you, one other little piece of information about the treating of this story, and we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to kind of leave it here. But if we look at the reporting of the Biden story, we see that although the right is reporting more than the left, not by a lot more. The right, 44% of the topics, or 44% of people talking about the Biden classified document story, are coming from the right. 38% are coming from the left, and the rest are on the center. And so it is not something that was being ignored by the left. It was covered by a lot of people on both sides. And so I feel like this was not being ignored, and it was being treated by both sides seriously.
Well, yeah, no, I wasn't saying it was ignored either. The fact, what we're trying to figure out is that they were covering it with bias. And, you know, um, yeah, I mean, what you're describing is like the definition of bias. You're saying, well, it's justified. I don't consider it bias because it's justified. Justified bias is bias. Like you're biased against the cheating spouse that's come, every time they leave the house, they're cheating on you. You're going to be biased against them
But you
because
also said that
there's a
someone
justification for it.
You
So,
did
so
say that
I,
someone
I
so
said
screwed
there's
should.
bias. You said there wasn't, and then you kind of now it sounds like you're saying, well, there is bias, but it's justified because Trump is such a dishonest, horrible person. There's a good chance he did some bad things. Biden, we feel better about him. There's a good chance he didn't do bad things, so we won't treat him with the same. We won't treat him the same, is what you're saying.
But you also agreed that what someone's past history should impact, how they're going to be treated in present similar activities.
Oh, to some degree, I guess that's true. But I would say this: when you have a story, especially of this import, it should be handled the same, and if not even exactly the same, because there were differences to the story. At least Biden is making an attempt at complying. It seems like I don't know why it took 2.5 months, or why he's still finding this stuff. I don't know why he doesn't get, even if you don't say, well, you don't accuse him of the same things. If there isn't more, there should be more negative talk about, well, geez, how could he be so irresponsible? A, he said this stuff a couple of months ago about Trump. B, man, when you get classified information, are you kidding me that he just has this stuff sitting in his garage that other family members that obviously don't have top level security clearance are able to access? He's got his garage open at different times. Trump, Hunter, I don't mean to throw Hunter Biden under the bus necessarily, but Hunter Biden,
But you
they
are.
had a picture, huh?
But you are.
Well, because there's good examples. I didn't see Jill Biden driving his car around. She shouldn't be seeing that stuff either. Hunter Biden was driving that car around that he had locked up in the garage, and his excuse at one point was, "Well, listen, I know that stuff was in my garage, but that garage is locked. I got my Corvette in there. I take really good care of that." And then they got a picture of Hunter Biden driving the Corvette around. I mean, other people that didn't have security clearance had access to that area where he had that stuff stored, and it was not under lock and key. It was very irresponsible. It would be enough to just say that, to really focus on that. Like, man, this is just, I mean, it's really irresponsible that way that he handled this, but it's just kind of brushed under the rug. Well, listen, he's complying. He's given the stuff to the DOJ over 2.5 months. But they don't even mention it's over 2.5 months. They don't mention about how irresponsible it was. There should be more focus on the things that definitely went wrong. And no, I don't think you should be jumping to espionage with Trump all the time and leaving, though, never mentioning that with Biden. That's not correct. There can be some level of, and the other side of it, Brian, is that I think your opinion of Trump is far worse than other people's, on that have opposing viewpoints. So when they hear you say that, or when they see they're not going to see the same justification as you. That, well, I mean, Trump's a dishonest person that I could see being an international spy, so I think they should treat him differently. The half of the population that voted for Donald Trump is not going to see it the same way.
Yeah.
So the media shouldn't handle it that way. You shouldn't handle it that way. There should be some level of equilibrium there.
Well, as we often do in these situations, we're going to have to agree to disagree, because we're pretty much out of time.
Thought we
Um,
agreed. We both said that they were biased. You're just saying it's justified. I thought we agreed. You
no,
conceded the
no,
point.
no,
You said it was
no,
biased.
no, wasn't biased.
Oh, it wasn't biased. Go
All
ahead and
right,
look up
listen,
the definition of bias when we get
we
off.
really do. We're gonna get cut off in a few moments here, so I do want to wrap this whole thing up. But there are things we agreed on. There's a lot that we disagreed on, but that kind of sums up our conversations in general. Um, but I appreciate you taking the time to have the conversation with me. I know you got other stuff going on right now, so go back to enjoying yourself and tell the family I said hello.
Okay, Brian. Same to you. Say hi to Chris.
I will. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.